So hi everyone, nice to see you all, and welcome to this printing conversation session with SJ Fowler, who we're really pleased to have with us. You recorded a session for us last year, didn't you, in the Print and Book Festival, and that's where we first made a connection.
Yes, thanks to Phil Owen and the Arnolfini, who made a connection between us, and I gave a short, kind of off-the-cuff lecture on asemic writing, which I think is doing very well in terms of YouTube numbers now, which is very good for my ego. But I've been teaching different methodologies around the possibilities of poetry in a very organic, methodological way for years. So I kind of set myself the constraint for that summer school lecture online to do it off the top of my head. And I think that somehow communicated some of the energy which is actually in asemic writing. And then you were very kind to follow up with that, and we made our tendrils overlapped. And we started to discuss the possibilities of extending that conceptual framework that I'm interested in away from the things that I've become familiar with to what you are an expert in. And that is the print, the letterpress, and the possibilities of that, which I've come across before in my work through collaborating with some really talented people like Jeremy Dixon and the unfortunate Barry Tullett. But apart from that, I had no expertise in. So I think that's how we started to come together to talk about what the potential is between a poet who's really interested in collaborating and the possibilities of what you do every day.
Yeah, I was really interested to know how a poet being introduced to the practical aspects of letterpress printing, how that might affect your work, and what work would come out of that as well. So we started to sort of think about this possibility of a project that we could get together for a short period of time and produce an artifact from it, but also to learn from each other as well. So we corresponded a bit online, didn't we?
We did.
And you said that you'd found some letterpress printed books.
Yeah, I think that, it was really dipping my toe in an ocean. A lot of the knowledge that we all have relates to our personalities and our internal genetic or idiosyncratic subconscious desires, and mine is quite randomized and frenetic.
Yeah.
So when I picked up on stuff that was letterpress made, I perhaps didn't even know it was.
Okay.
And I had no technical machinic knowledge and no context at all. So all the stuff I've been exposed to that was letterpress, I only realized when I started to research in order to collaborate with you and your peers and colleagues, was going back to other materials and going back to other things and picking up like very commercial books. So I found in a charity shops in London, which is where I live, looking for soft toys and old clothes. I found a couple of big...
Hang on a minute. Can you just elaborate on soft toys and old clothes?
No. I found a couple of really big commercial letterpress, just like a history of letterpress or advertising letterpress, and so I started to touch on maybe, again, there's a huge advantage to being naive around certain areas. So seeing how, not to sound critical, but there was a kind of occasionally kitschness around letterpress, that when we've discussed this a lot, how it's actually utilized, how it's perceived, is there value to letterpress because people know of the process as some sort of fetishization of the artisan or something, as opposed to actually, a productive art form with its own independent constraints. So that was my knowledge coming in.
Yeah.
And I deliberately alienated myself from looking at examples of people who were clearly both poets and printers or letterpress artists at the same time, apart from those I already knew, like Barry Tullett and people who I really respect. So yeah, I came into it quite clean-minded.
Yes. Yeah. Do you think that's been an advantage so far?
I think it always is, actually. I would say that as a metaphor for my whole 10 years in working in art and poetry, is that I like to go into situations with technical research, but not with content research, not looking at other examples, because sometimes, as long as you're not completely naive to what the auspice is, like when I started performing, I wouldn't go and look at poetry and performance. I'd go to theatre, I'd go to art performance, and I'd pull this in together and throw it into my own mix. And that's what I tried to do here too. Like understand the resources you've shared with me and how actually the technique and the history of letterpress works, but not look at a lot of letterpress artists or poets who work with language.
So with it's almost like an opposite methodology to someone who's studying in education, as that sense of researching the practice, finding out all about the practice, and then trying to find yourself and your own practice within that, and where you contextualize yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, because my experience is, and it's taken me 10 years to understand this, that actually a lot of what we're doing when we're educating ourselves, as opposed to collaboration, which I see as a kind of pedagogy, is growing our own confidence for our instincts. And we can become estranged from that through professionalization. You know, a lot of us who are lucky enough to make any sort of living from creative outputs end up getting deadlines and constraints, which then make our creative processes quite formal and functionary. And so what I've tried to do is encourage my own idiosyncratic, strange, instinctual urges. And so if I arrive at a project like this, which has specific limitations and specific collaborators, I don't want to blunt the avenues where I actually could contribute. And this comes from doing residencies in places like landscape architects, where I turn up and I think, what can I possibly contribute to these people who have such pragmatic practices? And what I can is a sensitivity to language and my own idiosyncratic, unique use of language.
Yes.
So I wanted to do that here. I didn't want to come and be like, yeah, I've looked up how you roll it like that, and then the ink there. I don't want any of that. I want to learn that as a subsidiary skill through the osmosis of collaboration, but be raw enough, as with the poems I'm writing right now for our project, to include mutton and shotgun cases and all these lovely vernaculars. And I think it's harder to do that if you become over-researched and over-focused in on trying to acclimatize and catch up with the expertise of people around you.
And we only have a short amount of time as well, don't we? So we have been working quite in intense bursts, and we spent a long time in the car this week, traveling to and from places.
Racing. Drag racing in Cheltenham.
So I'm just interested, before we kind of get to the nitty-gritty part of our collaboration, can you say a little bit more about collaboration as pedagogy and your experiences about that? I'm just going to check that everything's okay, so don't feel bad that I'm just looking over here, okay?
Yeah, well, we were talking about it early on, you know, as time's gone by, the more I've realized that so much of the work that I've done in organizing events and my practice, which often has been associated with collaboration in poetry, because not a lot of poets collaborate, is actually about work cultures. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier. When I did what I would term more working class jobs, when I was a guard in a museum and I was a doorman, did other things that were not middle class jobs, I had an amazing sense of comradeship and an amazing sense of closeness with the workers, because the jobs were really rubbish. But so you bond with people. And now I exist in a middle class universe. It's not easy to do that. You don't bond with people in the same way, and there's lots of reasons for that. But what I found is with collaboration, the obliquity, the attention is not on forming friendships, it's on making work together. And so what happens is you do develop a comradeship, and you do develop closeness, which enriches my life. And that's actually the whole reason why I'm trying to do this with my life, to have a better life. That is the fundamental goal, not to achieve any artistic output, but just to live a better life and be a better person without being too lofty. That's really what I focus on every day. And in that, you learn from your friends. You know, you learn from the people you're close to, that you respect, that you trust, and you pick up things not because of the content of that which you're learning, but because of the contextual association of the way you're learning it. So our experience yesterday in the Whittington Press gave me an enormous amount of new knowledge because I was attentive, because I was happy. You know? And that's nice. It is absolutely the case. And if we had gone and it had been hostile or strange, or we weren't getting on very well, or there was some strange thing that happens naturally in life when people are different in their intentions and personality, part of you may learn the skill, but you won't continue it on. And I think that's the core of teaching. You know, is making people have positive, subconscious or strange associations with that which you're passionate about. And then they'll continue it on because they associate it with something positive. So I see collaboration not as a way to create things, but as a way to learn things and be less alone in my job.
And I see our collaboration, part of my responsibility is it's quite nuanced, I think. It's actually making conditions right, responding to how I would imagine that you're feeling, and trying to be welcoming, to put you at ease, but also then to try and make are working together conducive, so we can actually give real attention to what we want to do, but also, as you said, we had a lovely day yesterday. It was a great environment, and I think it's a very special place. And so for those people who don't know about the Whittington Press, it's a press that's outside of Cheltenham, about 6 miles outside of Cheltenham. It's in a beautiful environment, and it's run by John Randle, who's been working there since the early 1970s, and his son, Patrick Randle, who's had his own imprint called Nomad Letterpress there for about the past 10, 11 years. And they publish a letterpress journal, they do lots of fine press publications, and Pat works with quite a lot of artists, poets, creatives who he does jobs for people, like more straightforward print jobs, but he also is able to fund much more exciting collaborations. And I think that meeting him yesterday was really beneficial for our collaboration with what he was able to input to your experience. I wondered whether you want to kind of...
Yeah, oh, it was extraordinary. And there was such a palpable sense that the personas of the place were connected to the nature of the work that they do.
Yeah, so much.
Pat could not be more down to earth and more generous and funny and sweet and supportive. There was nothing posed or, you know, pretentious about. It was really, you could feel the difference between, you know, the downside of my art form is that anyone with a pen can do it, which is good, but also can be bad. And also the public perception of what poetry isn't really what I think it is.
Yeah.
And then so you go to a place like the Whittington Press where you can see the amount of technical knowledge required, the amount of care, the amount of expertise and experience. You can see that it would take decades, as it has for you and for Pat and everyone who's obviously gifted in the field, to accrue the basic skills and like liminal vision to be able to actually create the content in the first place. And that exudes from the actual architecture of the inside space. Things everywhere, metal shavings all over the floor, giant metal stakes to go through your heart. I had no idea what they were for, and machines I had no sense of what they could be. And then even when people are being accommodating, there's this vernacular that's being communicated across the workshop. It was amazing, and to see that they have the machine to actually smelt the lead lettering rather than just have the font or, you know, the levels of it.
Yeah.
As someone who knows almost nothing about it, but you know, cursory research and an interest, it was pretty exciting. It felt like being allowed into a secret world.
Yeah, that's why I wanted you to see the whole process as well. And the Whittington Press is really, you get that because it's one of the, I think it's probably the only press in the UK now that actually casts its own type, uses it in print jobs, and then it goes back in the pot and it gets used again. So whereas a lot of people who have a letterpress studio, they'll have their type already. So to have that more kind of visceral connection with it, I really wanted you to have that sort of physical experience of the Vlad the Impaler sticks that you're talking about are ingots of lead, really, to cast the type. They're hung up and then they go into the pot that's used to then cast the type. So in thinking about yesterday, I wondered whether we should kind of talk to people, because we know what we've experienced, but take people through a bit your thoughts about the day and what we did at particular times.
Yeah.
So first of all, we arrived and we introduced you and Pat together, and he gave you a kind of tour of the press, but really told you in quite detail what the letterpress process was.
Yeah, and that's when I realised it was really good to not have over-educated or researched myself. I think a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, and I think even with the best intentions, a lot of people arrive at projects like this and they have tried to catch up with expertise as they can't possibly. And I think that was really useful for me to be a genuine blank canvas. And I think Pat could sense that I was completely open in my stupidity, which is always a great disarming weapon with someone where you're putting your finger into rollers and so forth. So it was just a really beautiful experience to try and focus in on the specific technical information that was being relayed, and also to get a sense of how that operates within the environment. Because what obviously my fundamental goal is, as well as collaborating with you and Pat and learning, is to write new poems. And I really, really believe the thing I might have accrued expertise in 10 years is creating fragments of language which are reshaped to respond to context. This is one of these things that I emphasize so much in my teaching and my work, is that poetry has historically had a culture of obsessing with content, the semantic. But when we really become sensitive to context, whether it's sound in performance or typography on the page, we can accrue texts which do things with poetry which can't be done in any other medium. So by understanding the process, the vernacular, the culture, the space, and having 2 or 3 hours with Pat, with yourself, with John, and with James Fremantle, who was there yesterday as well, working, I could accrue a sense of what the language world was. And that's what I'm interested in. So I was making notes all day. So I was not only learning the technical process, which is obviously a boon for me, but I was focused then also on what it is I wanted to achieve from it, which is making new work that somehow is a representation of that time and that process. So after learning and spending time having a lovely long lunch and being mocked by John in a wonderful way for not working hard enough, we then in the afternoon kicked into gear and really started to, and again, I'm very lucky that I've had years of collaborative projects on huge scales and very small ones, and to just say very clearly out loud, I know what I don't know,
Yes.
and I know what you guys do know.
And be comfortable with that.
Very,
well.
yeah. And how do we work together? So the thing we're going to make has our 3 names on it, and we're going to build this thing together, and we're in that process right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about context as well, and we've had kind of car chats about that, haven't we? With it's very much how I think about making in letterpress when I'm making my own work. You have kind of the ink, the paper, and the press, that all of those have variables, but you also have how you're feeling that day, the atmosphere that you're in the studio, and maybe the people that you're with in that space, and they all affect the work.
This is so important, and again, this is a big thing I focus on in my work and teaching. You know, the French avant-garde movement, the Oulipo, the constraint-based writing movement that's become very popular and is known. When I share it with people, I tell them it's about free will. Oulipo is essentially setting out a series of constraints which you might misunderstand as something mathematical and specific, about Perec will write La Dispersion, a novel without using the letter E, about the disappearance of E, and we all like the novelty of that idea. But the reality is, what it's about is acknowledging within consciousness there is only so much one can know, and that we are affected by context. The languages you speak, how tired you are, what food you're eating, these things are the invisible instinctual magic of why you ended up writing the poem you were writing. And none of us can get hold of that, no matter how much we're methodological about it. People can do all the workshops they want where they play with full stops and commas, but the joy of a subjective experience of a poem is feeling that other person's unreachable influence and magic. So when you go into an environment where you're actually trying to do that, you can't do it by focusing on it, obviously.
Yeah.
You can only do it by building good relationships, listening, making notes, spending time elsewhere, doing things. So what I was really keen on doing is having a contextual sensitivity to what letterpress actually was doing.
Yeah.
So we had this lovely chat about the recent, the relative recentness, for want of a better word, of embossing, of actually making letterpress indent the page.
Into the imprint, into the paper,
Because I was fascinated by this, because all the videos I watched, they were so emphasized in these like New York Times, you know, slightly strange videos about, look, there's still a person doing this, a bit like patronizing. But the people in those videos were always saying, look, you only get this with letterpress. And when we were talking about, you were saying, yeah, but that's not actually historically what the ideal was. So that, you know, really helped me, that one conversation, because I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to write text to be letterpressed about this process of learning, from you and Pat and what you do, what actually is the shape of the words? What's the length? What's the size? What's the vocabulary for the poems that are about that? So context is so important for that.
Yeah, I think it's seeing it now, isn't it? It's seeing that process now, today, in the 21st century, etc. It's not seeing it as some kind of nostalgia, or as you say, some kind of the idea that people are still doing it. It's the idea of what people are doing with it.
Absolutely.
You know, can I ask you about your physical experience typesetting as well yesterday? Apart from all the dust and fluff.
It was extremely dirty because I chose the typeface, not font. The typeface called Engineers Shaded, which obviously is rarely used within the Whittington press. It was so beautifully filthy. So I licked my fingers after grabbing all the letters. No, yeah, it was interesting to actually look at the map of the case and to make choices. Like, I've always been mocked by close friends for using the poetry name SJ Fowler. It's because I used to do a job which I don't want people to find out on Google. So I used SJ instead of Steve. And I'm so glad I did that now, because then Americans call me SJ and also my friends can mock me. Hey SJ, how are you? I'm like, yeah, really good, leave me alone. So looking through, shall I put Stephen J. Fowler, shall I put SJ, letter selection? Don't even think about it, right? You know, the way, so much of what I do is about handwriting and the physical, and then obviously people would say upside down and back to front and this kind of stuff. Just the tactility of it, gorgeous. I mean, I realise I don't have a natural inclination to it, but it's a gorgeous process. I mean, maybe because of the place as well. It's not like we were in some shiny, unused artisan fake. It was like, so that, yeah, or whatever. I loved it. Yeah, it's really good.
I find that it's interesting that there was lots of shiny new type as well, but you didn't choose that.
Yeah, I just asked Pat what's an unusual one, you know, because finding out Pat's middle name is Caslon.
Yeah.
that was deep. That was intimidating. So yeah, that was beautiful to go through and look at it in that way. And you know, I've sent manuscripts to publishers where I've set them in Gill Sans, and then you see that their house style is in like Arial, and you're like, you know, it's like seeing a restaurant with bubble font. I'm never eating there. You know, I'm going to boycott that. I'm going to start an online petition. If your restaurant signs in bubble font or papyrus.
So you're starting to sound familiar now.
Well, we all have typeface snobbery, and that was a good way for me to like, Pat, tell me what's a cool typeface. Stuff like that's awesome. I mean, who has that kind of expertise normally? For someone who's a writer and not an artisan or a letterpress person or a maker, you know, it's a different thing, I think.
And then I think what I found really fascinating about the afternoon as well, because I'm always kind of, I can talk for so long and then I have to do something, and Pat is the same. He'll start to get fidgety if he hasn't done something for a while. But the three of us together, was that time in the afternoon when we had a quick discussion, but we seemed to have, we made loads of decisions then. And what really aided that was just getting a piece of paper. So we could talk about it, but until we actually got a piece of paper and started folding it as a possibility. And we ended up doing something that actually we talked about on the possibility of that on Tuesday, but we didn't actually take it forward or anything. But then we've come back to that, and we've worked out what the structure is going to be and the format. But we felt that we had to have that, really, didn't we, before the content?
Definitely, and I think that comes from some of my, you know, I was a witness to a lot of those choices, and I think that's.
Were you?
Yeah. The paper, the fold. I was like, yes. Because I found that sometimes collaborative decisions go on forever.
Yes, that's
People
true.
create 25 options and choose none.
Yeah.
And you could feel you and Pat and your friendship and your dialogue and your history together and the space and the of Pat being like, we've got this Korean paper,
Yeah.
flip it out, and then it folded, and we're looking, that's a good cover, we'll do a sticker for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to say no, are you mugging to it? It'd be like, yeah, sounds
and
good.
we use Naturalis because it's really nice and smooth, even though it's quite a standard paper. But yeah, we drew the line at purple, didn't we?
You love purple so much, don't you? So you have purple guinea pigs, so you're obsessed with the colour purple. I resisted it. I was like, it's a bit much, Angie, actually. But no, I love that stuff because I do, on a microcosm, every creative person makes decisions like that around design, and poets don't get involved in it. And actually, that's the root of why I was very excited about this project and why I hope it goes on. And we can build an overlapping series of concerns where we draw in loads of other poets and loads of other people with expertise in letterpress. That would be great because that hasn't happened enough, I don't think.
No, I agree. And it's something that, I mean, we're, Sarah Bodman, who I work with, and I are organising a printed poetry symposium that you're going to be the keynote speaker at, and it's at the Arnold Feeney on the 14th of October this year. So it's an opportunity to discuss letterpress printed poetry and that kind of haptic experience of how the poet engages with a process within the context of the print shop, and how we're using text, words, and the printed, whether it's kiss impression or whether it's indented into the paper. That's an interesting discussion to have.
Yeah.
And before I think I'm just like putting my hat on with time. We are at 1 o'clock, but let's just we've got another day to go.
Yeah.
So we're going back to Whittington tomorrow, aren't we? You're doing a workshop at 2 o'clock with the MA students this afternoon.
Poor souls.
So yeah, you've had a taste, you want more, come along. And then, so tomorrow we've set a little bit of type already, haven't we, yesterday? Yeah. And then we're going to hopefully finish our typesetting and then print. We've got an 8-page booklet. We found, you want to just say about the block, which then led us on?
Yeah, so there was a box of blocks. I don't know if they were lino cuts or artworks. All sorts from the 50 years, I think, that the Whittington Press has been running. And John had an amazing, I mean, that was incredible, because I have a ton of this stuff now as like a souvenir. I nabbed it with permission. John, who had been working in that space for 50 years, had a huge bin, which he said he was going to send to the bonfire, which was a metaphor, I think, but he was going to throw out many amazing carved cuts and artworks and pieces of text that had been used in previous prints, some on his magazine, Matrix, yeah. How you pronounce it, and just said we could delve in and maybe take a few souvenirs. And we found some blocks, I believe is the right term, that related specifically to the concept. And so because I wanted to create poems with the environment and you and Pat, it felt very natural to this block, 25 poems, and a rendition of a bull and a cock, the cock and bull, to be the frontispiece, to be the cover of our work. So in that sense, there's one of the two very practical constraints of the texts that I'm writing, is there's going to be 25 of them, which means they're very short, which is good because I'm interested in minimalism and the monostick and these different minimal forms. But also then I know we have to load it, we have to sort it, we have to go through the letters. So I'm not going to be writing eons, galleys of poetry. We'd never leave, we'd live there.
Yeah.
So there are two constraints straight away. And when I found that, I was like, please, I mean, I said to you and Pat, we must use this because that's so receptive and responsive. So 25 poems is the title.
I did say you could cross out the 20 if you wanted to.
No, the universe would punish me for that. I would be karmically assaulted.
I think that was great, that moment though, finding that block and you saying, okay, right, we have to do this. So then everything totally changed and turned on its head, and you just had, right, okay, there's a boundary. That's where we're going now.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about what's going to happen tomorrow. Still don't know what this is going to look like, but then you'll be talking to everyone about it later on in the year after we've made the publication.
Yeah. And
hopefully we can get other people involved in future projects, etc. So There's a question from Emma Gregory,
Oh.
who I think you'll be meeting later this afternoon anyway.
I'm sorry in advance, Emma.
So when did you first realise that words were important to your practice?
Oh my Lord. Well, I started with words really. So yeah, I didn't start doing anything creative until I was in my mid-20s. And to say it incredibly quickly, when I found what poetry was, because I hadn't really conceptually even conceived of what it was. If I'm honest, I really didn't even know what it was. I did it at GCSE, but I thought it was just puff. Almost like someone reads you the Bible, you know it exists, but you don't really think about what it is until you're older or until you're actually mindful. Because my background, my family, a bit more working class maybe, there's just no environment where it freaks me out when people don't talk about the way we think. Knowledge itself. We just talk as though, sorry, I spat you a bit there. We talk about things objectively, but I actually didn't know what poetry was, so I had no sense of
How
that.
are you supposed to know anyway?
I suppose, but I think a lot of people I've met have always known that it exists as a way of expression or something. To me, it was a separate, phenomenology or epistemology of it. It didn't make sense to me, but I was hyperlinguistic. As you might have discerned, I ran it. So I think that my ability to talk quicker than I can think, and I don't mean that pejoratively against myself, it's a fact, meant that when I found poetry as opposed to visual art or anything else, it just made sense to me. So I think the answer to that question is a new question. In my genetic material, in my subconscious, exists language as something that I think is inherently fake because it's so easy for me. And the best thing to do if you think language is fake is write poetry.
Riveting. Thank you for sharing your process and experience and work, SJ, from Lila Dignan. Hi, Lila. So obviously, love made visible. Wondering how soft toys play into your poetry collaboration.
We got to the real questions. Thanks, Lila. I'm a collector of soft toys, or as I refer to them, my friends. Because again, when I started doing art stuff, I was surprised that a lot of obvious questions weren't asked. And one of them was why we fetishize the value of certain objects that are made financially valuable by a group of people we probably wouldn't relate to. So it seemed to me that the instinctual and immediate objet d'art was the kind of things we already had in our lives. And I always thought soft toys, I always imagined a group of people in a company creating these weird animal children. So it's not a childhood thing or it's about play for me. So I've got about 1,000 weird animals.
Wow.
Yeah. I just love them. I just think they're so funny and they're like they enrich my life. Because if I wake up and I found a giant weird ladybird yesterday in Bristol and the body's like that big and the head's like that big and it's wonky. It was by my bed. So when I woke up, the first thing I saw was this freakish ladybird smiling at me. That's why I'm in a good mood today.
That's the start of your day.
And then it was you, Angie.
Sorry.
No. You're similar. So that's why. I just think they're great objects.
Great. There's a comment from Simon. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname right. Tyrrell. I'm with Emma, waving to SJ. Knows that already, apparently.
Cheers, Simon.
Lizzie, hello. How did you end up discovering poetry in mid-20s? Did something lead to it?
Thanks, Lizzie. I had a really weird change of direction. I was doing martial arts, as I told you, and then I had a car crash. So I couldn't do that anymore. And then just randomly, I needed to do an MA just to get my brain onto something intellectual. And at Birkbeck, there happened to be a centre for poetry. And I just thought I'd give it a shout. And at that time, I was giving loads of things a shout. I was trying everything. It was just a real turning point in my life because I couldn't do what I thought I was going to do.
Okay.
And it just stuck. But that's so good because now I realise that it's just random. I was not born to do poetry. I'm not fated. It's not a gift. I could have ended up as a chef or a chef, as I like to call them. Could have ended up gardening. I could have ended up gardening. I could have ended up doing anything.
Yeah.
So to me, it's arbitrary and it was chance, and that's a great gift. But Stephen Mooney and the great people at Birkbeck, they put me on a lovely track. And my first ever poetry experience was the Writers' Forum. Yeah. Which, if anyone's heard of the Writers' Forum, that's a great place to walk into naively, being like Ted Hughes. I remember standing up and being like, does everyone like W.H. Auden and Shakespeare? or mispronouncing French poet's name, André Gide. It's Gide apparently, you know. So that was really cool to just find it randomly at 24. Yeah, lucky. Much better than having it when you were a kid and your parents stuffing it down your throat.
So Emma says that she's interested in how you might be working with the fragment or monostick in the context of the letterpress.
Yeah, I think
we talked about monosticks, haven't we?
Yeah, I think that I've always been interested in like the one-word poem, Aram Saroyan, and I'm not so interested in haiku because of the way people use it in the West, but I like the idea of compression. But because my personality and energy is quite big, so my work tends to be quite colourful or ebullient. So for a long time, I've been teaching and thinking through the constrained, the minimal. But why? You know, I did like a book of one-word poems, and I was like, this is the hardest thing to do because it's so concentrated. And the only area I've worked in that's like that is concrete poetry, where you can't get away with anything. You know, everything has to be examined and has to be purposeful, or it's just arbitrary.
Yeah. So if it's there, there's a judgment.
Yeah. Because the visual import is so vital. When you write a semantic-based poem, most of my poetry, you know, the nature of the narrative exists in time. You can get away with a sloppy word. In fact, I'd put them in deliberately, because then you're feeling the rhythm of the reading and the rhythm of the writing. But with the nature of letterpress and with the nature of every letter being said, it seems to me natural. That seems to me a natural connection. So I then thought, oh, this might be the time constraints as well.
Yeah.
And also the vernacular of letterpress. So when I started to draft the poems yesterday, I definitely had an experience where they were already too long. I already had 25 that were way too long.
Right.
Way too long. So now, tonight, it's cutting them down, bringing them down. So I don't think they'll end up being monosticks. I don't think so, but they'll be small. Yeah.
And are you going to, in the car tomorrow when we're driving for an hour and a half to get to Whittington, do you think, will we have a conversation about the content of that poetry, or is it going to stay until we get there?
It would be a dream that the poems change as we set them.
Okay.
That would be the dream.
Yeah.
That you and Pat, as we're setting it, say, you know what? Not the word ladybird, the word screaming horror, or whatever is on your mind at that time. Yeah. Pasty. Vegan pasty. Now, I would love it to change as we're setting it.
Yeah.
But you couldn't go into that environment without the poems fixed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that would be completely irresponsible. You'd be winging it.
You need something, don't you? Just checking our time. We've got two more minutes. So with that, I think that is a definite possibility, because we do have, although we have boundaries to stick to, when you're working with words and you're actually holding them in your hands and putting them on the press, it's only then till we print them out to see what something looks like, but also then you have, I think, the meaning changes when they're printed, because when you type, you can see it straight away. But when you set, there's that pause and there's that opportunity for change as well. As we're, proofing, I think, is the start of that process. So we get a print out, but that's almost like another beginning.
And I think thinking like through the wooden lettering and the lead, I don't want to use wooden because I can feel the derision from Pat and you yesterday, wooden lettering. So that was like, right, it can't be too big, but then also the scrutiny is like, oh, I better not waste words here. I better not put in the word jelly or something. These better be like really like with it.
What's wrong with jelly?
What's wrong with a good jelly? All right, that's a perfect note to end on, I think. What's wrong with a good jelly?
Well, that could go in tonight.
It's gonna.
Okay, thank you so much for chatting with me. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us. It's been really interesting. I'm really excited to see how this project is going to develop, and we'll keep you posted online and in person.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. 12:30, absolutely lovely. So many friends as well. It's so nice to be here. I want to say thank you so much for your hospitality and generosity. It's exceptional.
Oh, we've had a great time. Thanks so much. See you all soon. Bye.
Bye, Barry. Awkward final moments.